Today on Mental Health News Radio, Kristin welcomes Cynthia Tina. Cynthia Tina is an expert in the field of intentional communities, having traveled to over 100 sustainability and community projects worldwide. She helps people connect to intentional communities as a matchmaker for seekers and as a consultant for growing community projects. Cynthia is co-director of the Foundation for Intentional Community, FIC, a 35-year-old nonprofit dedicated to supporting intentional communities as pathways towards a more cooperative, sustainable, and just world. She is also the founder of Ecovillage Tours, was an office holder in the Board of Trustees for Global Ecovillage Network from 2015 to 2020, and was director of the Youth Ecovillage Network, NextGENNA. Thanks for tuning in.
I wanna try and take in all the highs, embrace them for more than a moment's time. I want you, please don't move when I push you away. I know I contradict myself some days, but will you ride the lows with me?
Welcome to Mental Health News Radio. I am your host, Kristin Sunanta Walker. Our goal is to help discussions about mental health be a regular part of your daily life, no different than discussions about physical health. Mental illness can be a topic of discussion under the umbrella of mental health, along with so many other topics. This show is the original program on mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com. Our network of shows are played in over 180 countries and cover more topics under that umbrella than you can possibly imagine. We were talking about mental health long before it became cool and popular to talk about, and thank goodness it has become so popular. We have incredible guests, advocates, patients, experts, people. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy our intro music, a song named Lows, written by Aubrey Toon. You can find her music at www.aubreytoone.com.
That night when I started praying, I cried. Will you ride the lows with me? Will you ride the lows with me? When I'm down, my vision gets blurry.
Cynthia, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me, Kristin.
Absolutely. So I am really excited about this because everything that's going on in the world right now with COVID and politics and civil unrest, not that all of those things haven't happened in other ways in other times, not COVID, of course, but there's such a theme that I see that could be so healing for people by living in a community and different than because we've gotten so separated, and with COVID, we're still, social isolation, all of those things. But even still with that, living in a community and the kind of the safety that's offered. And I've looked at that, a lot of studies in Sweden, for example, that have been done. I'm sure you know way more than I do, but about how helpful that can be for anyone, regardless of age. So I wanted to talk to you today first about, why this is a direction you went in your career.
Okay. Yeah, good
We'll
question.
start big. Yeah.
So I did not grow up in any sort of intentional community, any eco-village or shared house or anything like that. Pretty typical middle class, suburban, grew up outside north of Boston, and actually went to private Catholic school. So a community in its own way, but very different than the alternative communities I find myself working with mostly now. And it really was through a process of reading a lot, having the opportunity to travel, and just being really attracted to places where people were doing life differently. Different than the mainstream culture I had grown up in, where life, they were striving for more sustainability, for more connection, for going into feelings and process, and really creating these beautiful structures and homes and livelihoods. This was all really attractive to me at a young age. And I was fortunate enough to have a family who supported me in that passion. And I graduated with a degree in sustainability from Goddard College. And because Goddard is a low residency school, I was able to travel a fair bit of the world and visit these communities.
Yeah, you've traveled all over. Isn't that the best part of, I mean, not for everybody, but for me, the best part of travel is going and being with the people that live where you've traveled to, not the hotel and the tourist stuff, but the people that live there and experience a whole different way of living life.
Oh, it's eye-opening, of course. Yeah, and I was very fortunate to find my way to a bunch of conferences focused on eco-villages and found myself in various leadership roles. And over time, with visiting more communities and growing into more and more leadership, I'm now in the position where I am today as co-director of the Foundation for Intentional Community.
So explain what the word intentional is in there. There's community living, but there's intention in how you put it together as intentional community. So what does that mean?
Yeah, so the foundation defines an intentional community as a group of people who have chosen to live together or share resources on the basis of common values, explicit common values. So I think the intentional piece is really connected to having a clear sense of what members of that community identify as really important, and they're wanting to live together and share their lives around those values.
Okay, so it isn't a glorified rental complex that just says we're a community.
Yeah, there is that form, like retirement communities, or co-living is a more popular form of development now, where in the cities they create these co-living communities. Like, I think it touches into community living, certainly, but oftentimes doesn't have the intentional piece quite as strong, or the values piece as strong as other forms of community do.
Right, exactly. I laugh because I've lived in two very, very different, and yeah, just having someone say what this is why I reached out to your organization, because I was like, I don't think that how you behave and how this is done is what intentional community really means. So, but I'm all about mental health, so there's always that component of, what we see in these kinds of communities that do to foster people's emotional, mental, physical well-being. So in that regard, with it truly being an intentional community, in what ways do you see it being such a benefit to people's well-being?
Even before the pandemic, we had an epidemic of loneliness in the United States. So many people who just are living in their small nuclear families or living alone and not having a vibrant social life, or even if they do, like a meaningful one, and having purpose and fulfillment in connection with other people. So intentional community, in some respects, is going back to the way that humans evolved to live. We evolved in small groups. And we're kind of designed to thrive in that sort of environment.
Right.
And so intentional community does bring us back to this very human way of being. And it is a little scary, but I think it also brings so much richness to one's life to be sharing it with other people in a conscious way. And that itself is quite healing.
Very true. And what about what it actually, like a day in the life of because I know communities are set up differently. Some you go and live there and you do or either some of your rent or all of your rent or some of your housing costs or whatever are done in terms of a skill, a trade, and others are not like that. I mean, I know there are all different ways to have these things set up. So can you just give an idea of a day in the life of a couple of different kinds of communities?
Sure. Yeah. Like you say, there's a huge variety.
Right.
So on one end of the spectrum, you have more of this commune model, which maybe some people think of when they first hear intentional community. They're like, oh, something the hippies did way back in the
Right.
60s. And there are to this day modern income sharing communities where 100% of your income and your job and your livelihood is tied into the community. So a day in the life in that kind of community might look like getting up early and helping with chores in the morning. And I'm thinking of Twin Oaks community in Virginia, where they have a tofu business, a hammock making business. So maybe in that community, it's going to the shop to get started on making a hammock and breaking for lunch and going to the community kitchen and having your meal with other people in the dining hall. Maybe there's a community meeting in the evening where you make decisions based on consensus. But then on the other end of the spectrum, you could have a completely urban community that's like a shared house with young people who are totally tech savvy and like trying to find that edge of Silicon Valley subculture and creating something different. And their life might look like doing your job on your computer remotely and having other people nearby in a co-working space. And, maybe it's your turn to cook that shared meal that night for the community or not. Maybe you do all of your meals separately. And then there's another form of community that's more like co-housing. And this one is much more similar to the mainstream. Most co-housing communities are set up so individuals or families have their own unit with their own kitchen, but they have access to a common house or a common facility where they can always go to get community connection. So there is that, really nice grade of privacy to community. Whereas in the income sharing community, it might be more heavily on the community side and less on the privacy side.
Right, exactly. And I know there's so many courses. I mean, if people go to the community website, there's so many classes that can be taken on. I mean, just this wide array of topics. How much have you seen since you've become a part of this that grow and change and been kind of surprised that, oh, we're doing a course about that now. Okay, that's interesting.
Oh, well, we with the foundation at ic.org, we really launched our events program in earnest right around when the pandemic was starting.
Well, good for you. I thought, okay, that's why they look so new and hip and all that. I was like, wow, these are really good.
Yeah. So we're doing 2 to 3 events every week. Some are more networking focused, some are more workshop style. So yes, there's a whole range of opportunities to learn. Mm-hmm.
I saw one on there about how to handle if there's sexual harassment or something like that. And I was like, wow, they are really covering every single step of the base, because it's true. It's when you live in an intentional community, it's becomes a family of its own. And there may be people in that family that you don't really get along with all that well, or that there are issues with, and the community has to deal with it, not just you and that other person.
Yeah. It's not like, I don't want anyone to think that moving to an intentional community means that then your life is hunky-dory.
Right.
All, sunflowers and roses. All of the problems that exist in the wider world show up in the microcosm of community. But the difference is that in community, we have an opportunity to see it more clearly and to find ways to work with it and heal as a community with that intention. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's I'm sure that there have been many things that have been troubling. And I look at, let's say, people who suffer from any form of mental illness, so depression or bipolar disorder or severe anxiety, any kind of trauma that, or if they had early childhood trauma, that moving into a community, they're bringing that with them, of course, like we all do, but also any unhealed part of themselves from a past trauma is showing up with them too. And that is going to find a way to work itself out regardless.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And intentional community is like one of my friends, Jana Ludwig, she says it's like the most intense personal development course you can ever take.
Exactly. And I witnessed that with the spiritual community that I was at, that was part of their thing. Everybody owned their own homes on the community. And I don't know how I was not there for very long, but I did live there for a while. But everybody, not everyone, but a lot of people did workshops, spiritual workshops. And it was really interesting for me to see, okay, this is what this place is when we have guests coming in to do workshops, because you have to be, you have to be the teacher, not, well, yesterday I was upset with my neighbor because they took too many chicken eggs or whatever. Like you sort of suspend daily irritations and stuff to do these workshops. And then the workshops are over. And then you go back to, okay, this is where I live and we have our stuff that we got to work on. It was a trip to see that difference. It wasn't that was bad at all. It was interesting to see the difference between the two when you bring work, that kind of spiritual growth work to a community, and then it needs to go and everybody needs to just, I'm going to wear my clogs today and do nothing. You know what I'm saying?
Sure. Yeah. It's an incredible thing to live in close proximity to other people who you're not necessarily related to,
Right.
and to have that mirror held up, that reflective mirror of, oh, how am I being seen and who am I? And you sit with these questions more deeply, I think.
Right. Absolutely. Have you ever had any of them do any film work about their community?
Oh,
Like
well,
like a YouTube channel kind of a thing showing this is what?
sure. There are a lot of YouTube videos you can check out of communities who have filmed themselves, or different film crews have filmed them. We also did a few years back a series called Planet Community, where we had a film crew that went to, I think, 4 or 5 different intentional communities. And you can find that on our website at ic.org if people want to watch some videos about community. There's a lot out there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So why would a community, and what are the sort of criteria for a community to want to join your organization?
There really isn't much criteria. We are not a organization that kind of gives the stamp of you are an intentional community or you are not. Each community, it's up to themselves to decide how they want to be called, how they want to be structured. And to be listed on our directory, they basically fill out a form on our website, and our directory manager looks it over just to make sure that that community is in alignment with our values as an organization. Like we don't condone any violence or discrimination, for example. And if that passes through, then they're listed on our website. And we have communities that are just getting started to ones that have been around for 50 years or more.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, and we distinguish if it's a forming community or an established community on our directory.
What would be things that would make something not, not really be able to fit your? I know you're saying you're not the standard bearer, but yeah, I'm curious about that, because there can be, like, an apartment complex can, say, well, we have a community.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you, define those kinds of things and go, well, that's not really what we're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, it is in that case a little bit more hands-on of having a conversation with the community to find out if there is that intentionality piece. I don't think though we've had so many cases of this.
Good.
I think it's more often, what's more common is like one person who says, oh yeah, I want to start a community and I have all this land, and puts up a community profile without really having any other group to support it, or even a couple who, might be like saying it's a community, but it's really them who have most of the power and
Right.
its intentions.
That's what I was getting to. Thank you for that. Because yes, it's not a community. And this is where I really, listeners, we always talk about these things being so wonderful for mental health, and they really are. But you do have to be careful, because part of what makes it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Cynthia, but an intentional community is that there is a shared balance of power.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, you can have intentional communities that are, very spiritual and have a guru, or,
Right.
Or a monastic community where there is a strict hierarchy. I mean, those forms of intentional community exist too.
Right.
But definitely, I would encourage anyone who's thinking of joining or starting a community to go in with a high level of awareness about power dynamics, and
Yes.
to think of it as a big red flag if there's just one person who controls the finances or owns most of the land, and there's no plan to transition that to group ownership.
Yep.
That's a big red flag.
Yes, huge red flag, because people can get sucked into. I've seen this where, oh, it's a community and we love everybody and it's and then one after another of the people that move in that fell in love with pictures from 1982, that is certainly not what the place looks like now. And so they've moved across the country or whatever to this quote unquote community. And then they get there after they've moved, which, it's everybody's responsibility to do their due diligence. But I've seen this happen, and then realize this is not what the ad said. This is not a community. This place has fallen apart, and this is all ruled by someone who's just lied to you when you've moved your whole family. I've seen that happen too, and people get so upset and disappointed. And I think, oh man, that's horrible, because that's not what this is. It's like, that's a bad experience to have happen, but that's not what intentional community truly is. That's somebody or some entity trying to fool you into it. And that's not good. But what it really is something that can be so healing and so beautiful and so good, especially for people that struggle with their mental health.
Yeah, of course. I'm a one of the things I do is I coach people on how to find and join a community, and I always say visit first.
Right.
Visit a couple communities if you can, so you have some comparison. Make sure you see written documentation of the agreements for how to join and how to leave the community. That you go in with a list of questions and really be thorough. Try to talk to not just the founder of the community, but multiple residents who live there.
And not necessarily the residents that the person is trying to get you to talk to. Talk to people as you're walking by, people that aren't running up to tell you anything.
Yeah. And, and not to, it is a balance, because I think everyone has a different experience in community, and some experiences can be more positive or negative, and not to be totally turned off if someone talks about a conflict that happened. Conflict is very common and normal and natural in community, but you do want to find out how quickly was the group able to resolve the conflict and move on. Do they have conflict resolution policies in place, and are they using them? Those are kind of the questions you want to have in mind.
Right, exactly. That's where the word intentional comes in, because it takes work to make something like this. It takes, in my mind and what I've seen, it takes so much work to really put those those foundational agreements together, constantly revise them, get community input. There, it's not really a community when, like you said, one person is the owner. And so everything goes by them. And if they wield that power, that kind of narcissistic, I am the da-da-da, and you will do what I say no matter what, don't care what you do, then that's not really what the meaning of intentional community is. It may be what theirs is, but it's not really what the meaning is overall.
Yeah.
So in terms of how community comes together, you've seen it all over the world. So there's such a different idea of community. What are some of the themes that are the same no matter where you've traveled?
Well, people have to figure out the basics of living together. And those basics are pretty universal. You got to figure out how are you going to handle meals and cleaning up after the meals and making decisions together and handling conflict. And so these are this kind of social aspect,
Mm-hmm.
I think, is one big theme, which is handled in a variety of ways, but nonetheless needs to be dealt with in each community. And then there's also the more physical aspect of it, like the infrastructure, which again looks really different. So are you in a house in the city and have different rooms or apartments for residents? Are you way out in the country with no building codes and each person gets to build their own house however they want to, with straw and cob bale and converted school buses, etc. So the kind of social, the physical infrastructure, and the cultural piece as well. What are the values and the diversity or inclusivity you're striving for as a community? How much of an emphasis are you putting on ecological values, sustainability? These are some pieces of community life that need to be addressed no matter where it is.
Right, exactly. And that's why the visiting and the going to your site and going to YouTube and watching everything that you can about different communities. I know it's hard for people now with COVID to do visits, but maybe, there's more digging that you can do on the phone and on Zoom and on the internet too, because it is a huge decision. There are a lot of people on my network, as an example, and a lot of listeners that have experienced abuse in the form of psychological trauma at the hands of a person or an entity. And so they hear something like, a community, and they think the chance of someone that behaves that way in a larger group is higher. That was one of the questions that came to me when doing this show. How do we be careful about that? Because if first glance, someone might seem fine, and then after you live there for a while, you start seeing this pattern of behavior. And my response to that is, well, that's another, deep dive. Is it, obviously it's issues for you to still keep working on, and maybe some of your stuff is being put on someone that's being that mirror, or someone's got some stuff and unfortunately it's at this community, and navigating that is worth the journey. Just have a therapist to do it with you.
Yep.
So talk to me about the conflict resolution piece, because that piece is probably one of the most important pieces. What have you seen, be successful in terms of really managing the conflict that comes up living in that kind of an environment?
In healthy communities, the work starts well before there is a recognizable conflict. It starts with the community's culture, like I was talking about earlier, having some really explicit values and agreements and shared buy-in amongst the community that, these are all things that we collectively value. And I think in healthy community, there's also a value around being willing to go towards and work with tensions, not to stuff them away or hide them or avoid them, but to
conflict avoidance. Yeah.
So to work with tensions early on, to address them, to name them, and then having the safety within the community and the trust built up that if for whatever reason you're having a conflict with someone and you can't go directly towards them and deal with it with just the two of you, that you feel like you have an ally or support there that you can have, like a mediator or someone to listen and witness in that conflict. And a lot of conflict resolution policies in community will have that kind of tiered structure where first, if you can't resolve it on your own, get a mediator. If the mediator doesn't work, you bring in a bigger group. And then extreme conflicts might go to a community-wide council and might end in one or more of the people leaving the community. But that's pretty extreme. I think in healthy community, there is a habit formed around being able to work with conflict before it reaches such extremes, and to find ways to, do whatever processes and feelings work or communication work is needed to get to the other side.
Yeah. And that's for those of us, and I'm including my listeners in that word us, that have been in therapy and been in group therapy, we know all about that.
Okay. Yeah.
It doesn't mean though that it's easy when you're someone that's struggling with mental illness. So let's say, like me, I am shot out of a cannon from spring through summer. Like literally shot out of a cannon. It is inhuman how much work I can get done. And I've learned how to temper that over the years so that I don't do this. But in the past, it was these Olympic strokes of getting things done. And then seasonal affective disorder about fall, I can barely get anything done. And I had to structure my work life around that until I learned how to balance my own behavior. But I became a consultant because I can work an ungodly amount of hours during the spring and the summer, and that can fund me through depression time. And like I said, I don't have to do that anymore. But being in a community, that can look like, hey, this person is lazy. They're not pulling their fair share of the work. They're not blah, blah, blah. And so how you navigate that as a community that would understand mental health challenges would be, I'm sure is very interesting.
Yeah. Like we've established, all communities are pretty different. And I would say there is a variation in terms of how, accepting or how much capacity different communities have to accept people and live with people who have maybe different things going on in terms of mental health. And that's one of the things definitely to be upfront with a community you're thinking of joining, to share with them, to ask, because it's true too, like a community just might be at their capacity. They might already have a few people with different needs, and that's all they can handle at the moment, or maybe they're not set up to deal with that at all. And then there's some communities where that is totally embraced, and it's actually a benefit to be in a community like that, because you can share with other people your specific needs and your patterns, your behavior. Be like, hey, today I'm not going to say, on this day or this month, I'm not going to say hi to you at all because this is going on with me. And people are so much more likely to get that in community.
Right. When they understand. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've also found it a really good way to just shore up boundaries for yourself, being in a community.
Sure.
Because I think, and this is just what I've gathered over the years that I've looked into community and lived at a couple and so on. I think people think, oh, that sort of hippie free love, go into a community and you share everything and there's no boundaries and that's a healthy thing. And let's dispel that is not healthy. It isn't that is healthy. It isn't healthy. You need to have your boundaries, I think, in this kind of a situation have to be stricter. not a wall, but this is not okay with me. In where you're making a choice to be in a community than when in not. Do you find that as well?
I completely agree. Completely agree. Yep.
So how would you, if a new community of, let's say it's multiple people and they want to, buy some land together and have some sort of a community, what kinds of things would you and your organization do or could they go to for help and support?
Well, as we've mentioned, all of these online events and workshops,
right.
We definitely recommend. We've got lots of books also on our website. There's one book in particular written by Diana Leaf Christian called Creating a Life Together. And that really would walk a group through many of the practical aspects of starting community, as well as what kind of agreements you want to set up and what sort of legal structure. So getting those nuts and bolts things in place is important. And also, in the meanwhile, way before you even have a piece of land or a building, working on building up your shared culture, your
right.
vision statement, your values, really getting into why you want to create a community together and how you're going to respond when maybe things don't go according to plan or things get rough down the road. So thinking through those things well before actually setting up the physical infrastructure for your community. We also have some great consultants in our network. So if a group needed more support in that way, we are in the process of putting together some online courses. So piecing together our best events and workshops into deeper dive educational experiences for groups.
Nice.
Yeah, all of that can be found at ic.org.
Wonderful. Well, last question for you. I read on your webpage, which we'll give that in a minute, but I read that you are building a straw bale home.
Yes.
So is that a community effort?
So the community where I live is called Headwaters Community in Central Vermont. And we are a community where everyone who lives there has built their own home. And so each, we don't call them lots, we call them home sites on common land. And so we have all the homes kind of clustered together and each person builds their own home. It's a community that's been around for 10 years. I'm one of the newest residents. And so I'm not actually I was at one point envisioning straw bale. Now it's probably going to be something called light straw clay construction.
Okay.
But it will be passive solar design with a really nice greenhouse on the southern wall. And my neighbor is the kind of general contractor. And all of the other people on the build crew are locals, like in the community or neighbors.
Nice.
And my family is helping. So it's not like we're not an income sharing community where people are building my home for free or something like that. But no, definitely it's within the community that it is going up, and we have a roof on it right now. So it's exciting.
That's amazing. I know. And there's so many different ways. I mean, I've seen now with the tiny house movement, people starting intentional communities, and it's a bunch of tiny houses.
Yeah.
I mean, there's been I thought about doing that myself, but it's amazing what can be done. I just recommend that people get some therapy first, that you understand that you do have to talk things out with other people. In order for these kinds of things to be successful.
Yeah.
Cynthia, thank you so much for coming on the show. Tell our listeners again the websites that they can go to, and then your website as well.
Of course. And thank you so much for having me. So the website for the Foundation for Intentional Community is ic.org, intentionalcommunity.org. And there you can find lots of resources and articles and videos, all the good stuff we've mentioned. And then my website is just my name, cynthiatina.com. And there I can get you set up with a session with me where I help coach people on how to join a community. And I also provide a list of communities I recommend might be a good fit for you. So yeah, hope that you'll be in touch.
Fantastic. Listeners, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Mental Health News Radio.
Hi, listeners. I'll make it quick. These are some really cool places that give discounts and other cool things for listeners of Mental Health News Radio Network. If you want to get amazing help with healing from narcissistic abuse, go to healfromanarcissist.com. If you want CBD products that are the best of the best, I use them myself, go to proze.com and use the code mentalhealth20, mentalhealth20. If you want to get daily perk ups that help retrain your brain to think more positively, go to perkupdaily.com. And also, just because this one's fun, snarkycandles.com. I guarantee you'll love them. Snarky with a Y, SNARKY candles.com. And don't forget, if you want to hear all the shows on the network about first responders, you can go to firstresponder.mentalhealthnetwork.com, and all of our shows that focus on narcissistic abuse, narcissisticabusehealingnetwork.com. Thanks for listening, and back to the show.
But will you ride the low, low, lows with me? Will you ride the low, low, lows with me?
One thing you can always count on at Mental Health News Radio Network and my show is that there will always be dogs around. Why? They are natural healers, excellent for your mental health. The original therapy dog Miles has something to say in just a moment. For now, please check out all of our amazing shows at mentalhealthnewsradionetwork.com and all your favorite podcast apps. Until next time, I'm Kristin Walker, and thank you for listening.
And I can ride the low, low, lows with me. I can ride the low, low, lows with me. Till my vision clears up perfectly. I can ride the low, low, lows with me.
Good boy.